on that spectrum. We all want to get better, and I know that you probably know where all of us stand based on, a newbie, a guy that's pretty good but hasn't gotten magical yet, and then people that are going, well, I've pretty much seemingly pretty solid. What can I work on now? Is that something you'd want to tackle or no?
It's something to think about. I mean, I could, in my mind, somebody who's made, 10 batches or unders is still in the novice stage.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get up past 10, you start pushing past 20 into 30. Then you're past novice and into a solid basic mead maker. And rather than beginning, intermediate, and advanced, I'd go, basic, intermediate, and advanced. Because beginning, it kind of blurs the lines between somebody who's a complete neophyte and somebody who's actually made a few batches and has a good idea of what's going. And kind of liken that to, maybe different kinds of, levels of, for lack of a better term, college courses. You have freshman, sophomore, junior and senior, the different tracks, the 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500
Sure.
track classes for me when I was taking microbiology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the 200 track classes were stuff like microbial structure and function and, chemistry and, stoichiometrical equation and that kind of thing. Going into 300 track classes was applied mix or mix 310, where I was going, and that was, really interesting stuff like making yogurt and sauerkraut and pickles and wine and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And then, as you move on into the higher base classes, that's when you start angling toward the medical microbiology with, classes like medical mycology, pathogenic bacteriology, immunology and serology, radiation, biology and that kind of thing. They just get more and more advanced. So at certain levels, you're advancing all the time. At certain levels, there is a, cornucopia of things that you have to learn and to internalize so that when you're making mead I'll just call it as a novice, you are learning how to read a hydrometer and how to pull a sample cleanly out of your carboy or whatever fermentation vessel you're using. But at the same time, stuff that's not covered normally in that is, how to pull a sample correctly. And I'm not talking about using the apparatus to get the right amount. I'm talking about rather than bumping the sides of the fermentation vessel you're going into as you're pouring the sample, as you're going in and out and introducing contaminants and possible infection into your batches. When I'm like a specific example, when I'm dipping a sample tube in to pull off a sample so I can put it into a graduated cylinder for a hydrometer test, or if I'm going to test pH or YAN or dissolved oxygen or whatever it's going to be, I flame the lid of the fermentation vessel, with like a little micro torch from the kitchen. I sanitize my sieve. It goes in. I pull it out slowly so I don't touch the sides. The lid goes back on top until I've got the sample out. I go over, I drop it into I drop the sample or decant the sample into the graduated cylinder, rinse off the auto siphon, sanitize it, set it aside. And then I go back and I, take some sanitizer and I go to the inside of the lid and I spray the inside of the lid. Let any excess drop off. Do the same with the lip of the lid to make sure that nothing has settled onto there in the meantime. Any airborne contaminants or anything like that. And then I close it up, put the airlock on it. So these are things that people have to think about, especially if they're using carboys. The inside of the neck, the outside of the neck, the top of the mouth there, and everything on the carboy are all potential sources for infection. And if you're not sanitizing those before and after you pull a sample and not hitting the sides when you're pulling the sample out, you're basically playing Russian roulette. And that's just one part of the whole process. That without a good foundation in micro technique and aseptic technique, people are going to run into. Does it have to be, totally, you have to be 100% completely an anal retentive Hun to do this stuff all the time? It depends on your interpretation of just how far you want to risk your investment. To me, because I learned how to do that at an early age while I was, still at a place where I could be influenced to do things right, I learned it, and so it's just part of my routine now. But, people who start picking this up at 40, 50, or 60, they've got their own ideas on how they want to do things, and having somebody tell them that they don't know how to pull a sample right is just going to piss them off rather than helping them out. So that's where you kind of get into the difficulties of kind of grouping people together. I've seen people at different, wineries, meaderies, and breweries doing things that I would just I just turn around and walk off. I don't say anything because that's their business, and they're going to do things the way that they're going to do them, and that's their choice, and that's it. What I don't want to do is start telling people, hey, you're doing that all wrong. And, hey, you're really taking a risk by doing that, and they'll just look at you like, what are you talking about? So that's where it's kind of hard, because then it gets into where people feel like they're being critiqued because they're being, treated like a child. Okay, it looks like you don't know how to pull a sample. Yeah, and there's better ways of saying that, but it's all like, okay, let me show you how I pull a sample, and this is why I do these things, and this is why it's important. Whether you want to do it or not is up to you, but see it. And getting into the age thing right now, at my age, I just don't have the patience to do that with people anymore.
Let's be honest, Pete, you didn't have the patience when you were younger either.
Yeah. Yeah, so and the other thing is when you're doing stuff, on your crush pad, on your bench, on your testing area, in your little microbiology lab, or in your chemistry lab, and I make a distinction. There are things that you should be doing there too. And maybe someday I'll go ahead and put that all down to a point of where it just makes it, abundantly clear to people that if they're not following a certain aseptic technique, they're, risking contamination of their batches. And you know what? A lot of people will cruise through that and never have a problem, or say they've never had a problem. But, you do this for, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and you're repeating the same mistake over and over and over. Guess what? Every time you repeat that mistake, the odds that you're going to screw something up go way up. And as you can afford, through your life, as your earnings go up and as your, expendable income go up, and, as you spend more and more money on bigger and better fermenters and bigger and better batches of honey and more expensive honey, sure enough, it's going to hit when you've, really dropped a lot of cash on doing something that you're going to want to make really, really special. And so to me, if you don't start practicing that stuff right off the bat and don't make it part of your methodology, then you're really going to run into problems.
Yeah, that's cleanliness is next to, everythingness. And now forever I'm going to have this image of you snapping on rubber gloves every time you're going to do testing.
They're actually not rubber. They're black nitrile examination.
The black nitriles, yeah. John has a whole box of those. He uses them for all kinds of stuff. But
I saw a picture on Facebook the other day of somebody. It was a professional meadery, and they were in their shop working and taking pictures along the way. And the first thing I saw is, how come you guys don't have a hairnet on? And I wanted to go to Facebook and post a question to all the pros. How many of you people wear hairnets while you're in the shop? And figured probably not.
And beard nets. I mean, more than half the meadery owners I've seen have these big ass beards, and it's like, does that ever get in the mead?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like people with face forests, you know that they're dropping some of that stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of hoping that you got a good strain in there that's going to be able to outcompete whatever's there.
Yeah.
It's a good reason to use K1V, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kills everything dead.
That, and it's a good reason to learn how to do SO2 additions and make adjustments and keep it all where you want it to keep, and especially when you're going to bottle it. And well, along the way, actually, that's pretty good insurance.
Interesting bit of trivia on K1. You know why they named it K1 V1116?
Why did they name it that?
The K would stand for killer.
Yes. And it's killer strain number 1. There's K1 through K5.
Okay.
And the V1116, I have no idea why they designated it that way, other than it's like, you know, a particular lot or a particular run that they were making on that strain. But the K1 indicates that it's the killer 1 strain or a K1 strain.
Mm-hmm.
The strain, I should say, the genus and species has that particular killer strain of K1. There's a really good set of articles on that in the American Journal of Viticulture and Enology about the killer factors K1 through K5 and how they act on the target cells, the sensitive yeast cells. And remember that, you know, if they have a killer strain, it's either killer active, killer neutral, or killer sensitive.
And you said that was, please, the American Journal of what and what?
Enology and Viticulture.
Thank you.
It costs like, I can't remember what it is for an annual subscription. It's like $120 or something like that. But if you really want to up your game and you have questions about fermentation and yeast and the microbiology of yeast and the genetics of yeast and so on and so forth, it's all going to be in there.
And it'll be worth the fee for the yearly subscription.
Oh yeah, and it's dry reading. Let me tell you, there's sometimes you just want to go jump off a building.
Right.
But
so it's like the JAMA of wine journals.
Yeah, it's kind of like Assembler code.
Oh God, that's terrible. That's Oh, ew. We're still gonna link it though. I've got a couple of questions hanging out there for you that I want to get asked before we let you head on your merry way, because I know you have to get up super early in the morning.
Yep.
Okay, Danny had asked, and this was from way back at the beginning of your talk, besides, letting the honey talk to you, what other avenues do you use for inspiration, if any, for your meads?
Generally acid jazz played at about 120 dB. Cooking. You were mentioning the Flavor Bible, and that's a big thing with me, not necessarily just the Flavor Bible, but a lot of the stuff that, we make, and my family has, coming from Eastern Europe, has different flavor profiles and different herbs and spices and everything we put in there.
The pictures you send me Easter every year, you're a bastard. I'm just saying. Oh my God! He's like he sends me these pictures, and it's like an entire lamb on a spit, and all of this is like, I want to come to your house.
Yeah, and so I think cooking is a really good, way to get an idea of, how to start blending flavors and how to, how things as they're cooked, change. Mead, for lack of a better term, my uncles always called it the boil. when you're making wine.